New Gear Day is always a good day, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my new setup, which I've been slowly building up over the last couple of weeks, the heart of which is the new Pro Sim Rig PSR1, and it's a bit of a beast. Hello fellow sim racers. As is often the case with these gear review videos, this one has gotten away from me a bit and it's turned into a longer video than I'd like. So I've put a list of timestamps in the top comment so you can skip any of the bits of the video that don't interest you. Personally, I think it's all important, but the analytics tell me that not all of you agree. When I moved into this new space, I was keen to upgrade from my trusty GT1 Evo rig to something a bit bigger and, much more importantly, more flexible. That's where the guys at Race Anywhere stepped in and set me up with this Pro Sim Rig PSR1 and a full suite of the add-ons, which will make life considerably easier with the revolving door of kit that comes through here for testing. Of course, I'm telling you this for the sake of transparency. As always though, I am free to say whatever I like about the equipment. Who are Pro Sim Rig? I hear none of you asking because this isn't a duplex medium of communication. But if you are asking it, then that's actually a good question. Pro Sim Rig is what happens when a sim racer with business experience in the engineering and manufacturing sectors decides to build his own sim rig. In short, things escalate. I'm not going to tell you the whole story here because this video is more than long enough as it is, but the Cliff's Notes are that they are a relatively new entry to the market based in Denmark and have significant manufacturing backing behind them, and critically, it's run entirely by sim racers. I should also mention Race Anywhere, who were kind enough to supply me with all of the kit, and importantly, really listen to my needs, especially when it comes to the flexibility that I need for this whole YouTube gig. Race Anywhere are the UK retailer of Pro Sim Rig's products, and are currently expanding their product offering from their base near Silverstone. Again, this is a company that's run entirely by sim racers, and on a personal level, it's really nice to be working with a group of local people who really understand us nerdy sim racer types. The PSR1 is a high-end sim rig constructed from that now familiar combination of extruded aluminium profiles and bespoke steel fabricated parts. It's very much from the more is more school of thought when it comes to strength and rigidity, and that's no bad thing. The main chassis is constructed from hefty 160mm extrusions, which means it's got less chassis flex than my MX-5. And of course there's the usual suite of accessories that you would expect with this kind of thing, and they are extremely well thought out, though I'll talk more about that later. When you're building a high-end sim rig, there are a few things that are pretty critical. Can it stand up to the loads being placed upon it by any of the high-end components you might use, like direct drive wheel systems or even hydraulic pedals? Will it offer flexibility for future upgrades? Because, well, there will always be future upgrades. And is it going to last? After all, high-end sim racing gear is expensive, and this is something that should last years, if not decades. When it comes to aluminium extrusion rigs, they have a lot in common, so the differentiation is often in the types of extrusion used in the design and details, which are, in my experience, critical. The PSR1 generally opts for chunky extrusions, the main frame being 40 by 160mm profile with uprights from 120mm. Lighter profiles used in the less stressful areas to save a little bit of bulk and weight, which is also no bad thing. There is literally no flex in the chassis anywhere, or at least none that I could find. In fact, if anything, it's helped expose how some of my other equipment does have flex in it that I hadn't realised before because I couldn't really measure it, especially the Sparco seat. Yep, the one motorsport component on my rig is the one with the most flex. All of the extrusions were well cut and dimensionally accurate on the samples I tested. I know it's basic stuff, but it's important to get the basics right. Before we move on from the extrusions, I should mention that I opted for the black version of the rig, but it's also available in silver as well. This is the third extrusion rig I've had, and they've all been black, and I can tell you from experience that the black anodized finish, well, it does get marked easier than silver, which may be a consideration if you like things to look pristine. On that note, the finish on the PSR1 is a pleasing matte black, which is great to film because it doesn't reflect light as much, but it also means that it soaks up a lot of light too. Anyhow, I managed to get the rig together without damaging the finish, though my ham-fisted attempts at adjusting the monitor stand did leave a couple of small scuff marks. Again, this is something that comes part and parcel with anodized finishes and isn't really specific to the Pro Sim Rig, but I thought I should mention it anyway. One of the things that really separates the great from the good in the area of high-end sim rigs is the quality of fabricated parts. And I think this is one of the biggest strengths of the PSR1 rig. With this rig, thin isn't in, and as you can see, the stock steel used for these critical parts is it's pretty hefty. The ACC pen is both for scale and bragging rights. I'll be reviewing it in a later video. The thick gauge of these parts also allows for countersunk bolt heads, which is something that's not always available on other rigs in this part of the pool, and definitely helps from an aesthetic perspective. Speaking of which, these steel parts are very well dressed, and powder coating job does seem particularly robust. However, it's not entirely imperfection free, and I did notice a couple of small marks on one or two pieces, though I am nitpicking here, and there's nothing that really bothers me or that I would notice without going to look for it. Finally, before we move on from build quality, I should mention the fixings, of which there are many. The quality of these does vary wildly across the industry, and in my experience, bad T-nuts in particular can make life a lot more difficult. There are no such issues here, and all of the T-nuts and bolts were well fitting, with good threads, and were very resistant to my ham-fisted attempts to ruin the bolt heads, which is always a nice thing. In all seriousness though, the quality of the drive socket in the bolt head is actually really important to me, as I invariably end up undoing them dozens of times a year as I swap gear in and out. As for the other fittings, quality has obviously been a high priority throughout. Particularly impressive are the feet, which are an optional extra and could easily serve as axle stands should the need arise. Joking aside, the arguably over-engineered nature of some of these parts is extremely reassuring. After all, one man's over-engineered is another's hold my beer, so it's nice having wide margin on these parts. This one's always a little bit tricky to explain, and with extrusion rigs, it's all too easy to assume that they're all pretty similar because, let's be honest, they do look pretty similar. The key thing here though is flexibility, which means the ability to set the sim rig up in lots of different configurations to suit different seating styles and human proportions, as well as the ability to mount lots of different stuff to it in lots of different places. And a lot of this comes from the design of the pedal deck and wheel mount. In the case of the latter, Pro Sim Rig can supply 3 different styles. I have the Fanatec direct drive type mounted here, but a traditional wheel deck arrangement is available, drilled for all of the normal wheel setups, and there's also a front mount for other direct drive servo setups like OpenSimWheel and SimuCube systems. They all feature the same side plates, which allow a far greater range of adjustment than any human being could possibly need. As for the pedal deck, this simple design offers a huge amount of flexibility in terms of height, distance from the seat, angle, and in the mounting position for the pedals as well. I've even presently got them set up such that the front extrusion is being used as a footrest for a new set of pedals that I'm testing out, though more about that in a future video. The pedal deck really is one of the standout parts of this rig. It's seriously solid, as is everything else, but the range of adjustment is really the USP here. As for the adjustability of everything else, at a shade under 6 foot, I can have the seat all of the way forward on the sliders and don't have to have the pedals set all of the way back, so I'm confident that those among us that can check for dust on the tops of bookcases will have no problem finding a comfortable seating position in this rig. Now, speaking of seats, which I haven't really spoken about yet because they are supplied separately, as is usually the case with extrusion rigs, so you can choose whatever suits your needs best. What I think is totally unique to the PSR1, however, is that you can specify your seating height when you order the rig, with low, medium and high options available. This alters the height of the middle and rear chassis extrusions, allowing you to choose from a seating position that somewhat emulates a low-style Formula car all the way up to a road car. It's a nice touch. I opted for the high rail since I figured there would be more space in and around the rig to point cameras and lights, but with the adjustability of the pedal and wheel deck, you can still vary the seating position from something that emulates a GT car to a normal road car, which I think for most people will be perfect. Finally, I'll be discussing the design and performance of various add-ons and accessories in their own dedicated section later in the video. Performance is a bit of an odd thing to discuss when it comes to sim rigs because when it's all working properly, it should just sit there motionless in the background. And that's the case here. The chassis, wheel deck and pedal deck are extremely rigid, which makes for a driving experience where you just sort of forget the rig is there. And that's exactly what you want. The chassis is the bass player in the Sim Rig band. It's a crucial part that everything hangs off of. It needs to be solid, tight and on it 24/7, but generally, you're not there to watch the bass player. As I mentioned earlier, having a rig with this level of solidity has exposed just how much flex there is in other components that I've got when they're under load. The Fanatec pedals bend slightly, the Sparco seat pivots at the hinge, and there are small amounts of play in all sorts of other pieces of equipment that I've just not been able to detect before, and that's coming from another extrusion rig. Quite honestly, in terms of the physical process of assembly, this very much goes together like most other extrusion rigs. That's the beauty of this type of construction, it's straightforward and repeatable. But where this rig stands out from the competition is in the assembly instructions, which are by far the best on the market. Now, I'll admit that is a bit of a low bar in my experience, but these are spot on, and that means you're less likely to make mistakes during assembly that will cause you to have to go back and reposition things later, which I can tell you from experience is a pain in the backside with this stuff. There are a couple of notes I'll make about assembly before I move on. First of all, if you opt for the optional wheels or feet, it's probably best to commit to adding them fairly early on in the build once the main frame's built, as the rig does get a bit cumbersome once you start adding the seat, wheel deck and pedal deck as well. On that note, the wheels are excellent, solid and grippy, and just what I need in this studio environment where I'm swapping things around all the time for filming. But they don't pair all that well with the floor mat, which I think really is designed with feet or a bare chassis in mind. Just something to keep in mind. While the main rig more than meets my expectations, it's the add-ons and accessories that really bring the whole thing together. Starting out with my favourite part, the PC stand, something I didn't really realise I needed, but now don't know how I ever lived without it. It's not a complex design, it doesn't need to be, and the function it serves very much outperforms its humble design. Keeping the PC off the floor and out of the way behind your main monitor certainly helps keep the build nice and clean and makes cable management significantly easier. And for someone like me with a reasonably complex setup with the use of redundant internal and external video and audio capture, it's a lifesaver. If you're running triples, VR, or a multitude of other add-ons which add to the complexity of your sim rig, I would definitely recommend getting your PC hidden behind the center screen. Next up, the monitor stand. This comes in both heavy and light flavors and can be configured for single or triple monitor setups. And on top of that, literally there's a fourth monitor add-on. As you can see, I'm currently using it without the triple monitor arms, but I do have a fourth monitor added on top. The stand is solid and has a wide range of adjustability, which is honestly all you really need from a monitor stand. As you can see, I have the wheel deck set quite high, and there's plenty of vertical adjustment left in the monitor stand if I needed it with this 32-inch 16:9 monitor. If you do have bigger monitors, the heavy version of the stand is also available, and the price difference is tiny. As for the construction and build, well, as you would expect, it is very much the same story as the rest of the rig. Well cut and finished extrusions and chunky fabricated parts that inspire confidence. Now, this is especially important for the fourth monitor add-on bracket, which is literally holding the quality of construction over your head. The keyboard and mouse trays are well built, but honestly fairly unremarkable. The keyboard arm is as solid as a rock and you can swing it in and out as you would expect. There are small amounts of play in the hinge, but that's in line with every other extrusion hinge of this type I've used before. As for the mouse tray, well, it's a sheet of steel, powder coated with some holes in it. Not much to write home about. These are two products that do the job, do it well, and do it in a way that just doesn't get in your way. If the sim rig is the bassist in the band, then these are like the guitar strap, an important part of the system, but nobody's going to be writing articles in the culture section about their iconic design. Finally, there's the cup holder, which quite clearly is the most important part of the rig. I've tested this extensively and I can confirm it does in fact hold cups. And before I move on, it's probably worth mentioning that all of these accessories will work with other extrusion rigs as well. Let's kick this section off by talking turkey. I don't want to mention exact prices in the video because I want this to be accurate in the future, and honestly I've been caught out by this so many times before. The rig is clearly pitched at the high end of the market, and as such its competitors are the likes of the SimLabs P1X and the Track Racer TR160. And it beats both of these on price by around 10% at the time of recording this video. Having used all three of these rigs, I'm pretty confident in saying that this is a great deal. But the value proposition isn't just a simple price to performance metric, or at least it's not as far as I'm concerned. There are lots of other small things that tip the balance slightly more in the favour of the PSR1. Pro Sim Rig and Race Anywhere have a strong commitment to reducing environmental impact that reaches from recyclable or reusable packaging materials through to the product itself, which is, well, honestly designed to last a lifetime. And even then, the steel and aluminium is widely recyclable. This might not be a big deal for some of you guys, but for others, I suspect it's music to your ears. And not just bass guitar. Another factor that I really appreciate is the commitment to support for the product from both Pro Sim Rig and particularly from Race Anywhere as well, who are extremely dedicated to the seemingly long-lost art of customer experience. I won't go into this in too much detail here because it's so off topic, but it's refreshing to come across people in the sim racing space that are so customer focused, when honestly a lot of the big names are just not very much in my experience. So then, what do I think of the Pro Sim Rig PSR1? To put it in a single sentence, it's a well-made, well-priced, well-thought-out sim rig, and I think it'll be a popular choice for those wanting a high-end extrusion sim rig. If you're running pedals with 100 plus kilos of force and heavy direct drive systems, then this is the ballpark you're playing in, and I think this is an excellent option. The rig itself is well made, goes together easily, and it's extremely well thought out in those critical areas that really make a difference. And the optional accessories like the PC stand and the modular monitor stand really help you configure your rig the way you want it. If you're in the market for this kind of rig, then I really do think the Pro Sim Rig PSR1 warrants serious consideration. Now, if you're from the UK, they're available from raceanywhere.co.uk, and if you're from elsewhere, it's prosimrig.com, and of course there are links in the video description. So then, that starts to bring things to a close here. As usual, if you've enjoyed the video, it would be great if you could hit the like button and maybe even subscribe if you want to see more content like this in the future. So I guess all that's left to say is goodbye. Thank you so much for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.